Hey Jess, it's almost closing time in our guide to home selling in North Carolina, and you know what that means.
No.
It's closing time. Forget about your old home. You're about to get a big fat check.
Oh my gosh.
It's closing time. Pack your things and sweep the floors, 'cause you're about to meet the buyer at your door. Okay, we'll do it together. I know who is gonna buy my home. I know who is gonna buy my home. And I know who is.
Wow.
We tried again.
So far in the series, we've worked through the process of selling your home, from pre-listing preparation, marketing, activation, and negotiating offers. And our last step to discuss in this process is getting to closing.
So what are some of the things a seller needs to be taken care of from contract to closing? How do you navigate any repairs or negotiations? What are you as the seller responsible for in terms of cost at closing?
We'll answer these and many more in our very last portion of this series today. So without further ado, let's jump in.
Now that you're under contract with a great buyer for your home, there's still a process we have to go through in order to get that buyer to the closing table. The buyer is given the right by the contract to investigate the property fully during their due diligence period. Some buyers may want your home badly enough that they waived any right to concession or negotiation for repairs. Or they may have waived any request of price reduction as a result of an appraisal discrepancy. But those are more the rare exceptions than the rule. More often than not, if they can find something to request, they'll request it.
Now it's up to us to utilize the leverage we have in order to minimize your costs. The perfect case scenario is not to concede any cash here for repairs or for appraisals, but it's not always the best choice just to say no to their requests. This comes down again to that due diligence fee. With enough due diligence in the offer, we have a significant amount of leverage over the buyer. If they come to us with an appraisal discrepancy of $5,000 and a repair request of $3,000, but we have a due diligence fee of $10,000, then we're not obligated to come their way at all. The only leverage they have is to walk away from the contract. And if they choose to do that, you keep their $10,000.
However, what if the buyer has only given us $5,000 of due diligence, and then they find some significant repair issues that total up to $10,000? In this situation, it may make a lot of sense to come their way a little bit. If we don't, there's a higher likelihood that they will walk away and leave you with a hefty repair bill or a need to disclose that there were major issues uncovered. That's worst case scenario for us, as going back to market after going under contract already puts a black mark on your listing. And your agent, although working their butt off to get this sold, is obligated to disclose all material facts about the listing. A material fact is simply anything that would affect the buyer's decision to purchase the property. So you may be on the hook to display anything found to potential purchasers.
We find that it's way more beneficial in this situation to try to negotiate with the buyer's agent to get a favorable outcome. You've still got their due diligence, so you don't need to come the whole way. But you need to plan to meet them somewhere in between to ensure that they are still going to go all the way to closing. Whether this is a large repair cost or a significant appraisal discrepancy, the seller can come the buyer's way by one of the following. Repair it themselves.
The seller has the option to repair the issues themselves prior to closing, and the buyer can then investigate to make sure the repairs were done correctly.
Concede cash in lieu of repairs.
The seller can pay a portion of their proceeds to the buyer at closing in order to cover the repair costs.
And price reduction.
If there is a significant appraisal discrepancy, the seller can lower the price of the sale, effectively lowering what is due by the buyer at closing.
A cash purchaser may also request this option for repair concession, as it just lowers the amount of cash they have to pay for the home, and they can make the repairs with the saved funds.
Once we negotiate and all parties agree to the terms of concession or repair, we sign a due diligence repair request and an amendment to contract with all of the changes. Technically, all of this has to happen before the due diligence period expires because the contract makes it very clear that you need to get all of this done before that deadline. However, it's not super uncommon to keep negotiating for things after the DD deadline has passed, especially for reports that may come in late, like appraisals or surveys.
Probably the most common situation that would arise after the DD period is an encroachment uncovered with a survey. Buyers can get a survey to clearly define lot lines and any encroachments regarding neighboring properties. The buyer could come back to you and request that an encroachment agreement be signed by the neighbors, or that anything encroaching onto a neighbor's property get removed before closing.
It's also possible that the buyer may not be finished with their investigations before the due diligence period ends, and they may request an extension. This is especially important if the buyer is offered earnest money in their offer, because that becomes liquidated damages for terminating the contract after the DD deadline. The seller isn't obligated to grant this to them, but we often find this puts a card in our favor, especially if they're trying their best to get it done as quickly as possible. If it takes even more time, it could result in them pushing back the closing date also. We definitely don't want this to happen because that's when you get paid and can close on the sale. Technically, the buyer has 7 days of grace built into the contract, so we often advise them to use that before extending the closing date. But in some scenarios, we may need to work with them, especially if we don't have a lot of leverage over them and we don't want to go back to market.
Important to remember here that the due diligence fees and the earnest money deposits are the only investments tying the buyer to the contract. If you as a seller decide you want to terminate the contract, unless the buyer agrees, you are in breach and owe them everything back that they've invested, including due diligence, earnest money, even inspection and appraisal costs. So we absolutely want to go all the way to closing once we get under contract. If the buyer terminates, though, as a result of not getting the repairs they want or it appraising too low, then we keep whatever deposits are in effect at that time. Let's assume that all of this is negotiated well and we are past our due diligence deadline. Now we can start prepping for closing day. The attorney representing your buyer will most likely reach out to your listing agent or to you directly requesting some information. Real estate attorneys are the ones responsible for balancing the debits and credits at closing, so they need to know all your costs, including agent commissions, loan payoffs, document preparation, and taxes. Since we haven't explicitly discussed the costs yet in this series, we'll give a quick rundown of what this typically looks like.
In most cases, the seller is responsible for paying both of the agent's commissions from their proceeds at closing. This completely depends on what you negotiated with your agent prior to listing your home. You'll also be paying off any current liens against the property, including mortgages, second mortgages, equity lines, and any repair costs that have yet to be paid. There will be small document preparation fees for preparing the deed to be transferred into the buyer's name. You'll be responsible for paying any portion of the tax bill you haven't paid yet for the portion of the year you've lived there. Or you may even get a credit back from the buyer if it's already been paid. And lastly, North Carolina requires an excise tax for every property sold, which is equivalent to 0.2% of the sales price. If you have any additional costs, like capital gains, those won't be paid at closing, but will be paid at tax time. Definitely talk to an accountant prior to selling if you think you may owe any capital gains tax. Better to know how to avoid those, if possible, before you list.
A great agent will help you predict these costs before you ever list with something called a net to seller. This should give you a relatively accurate prediction of what you should make from the sale of your home minus costs. Before you ever list, know the best and worst case scenarios so you know if this is the right time to sell or if you should wait for a better window. You'll get something called an ALTA from the attorney prior to closing. This balances all of the credits and debits and shows you what you are going to make. Just to reiterate, the goal here is that nothing else remains outstanding in terms of cost or profit. So at closing, you are getting the bottom line with no additional obligations for you or the buyer. If something seems off when you get this, have your agent reach out to the attorney to figure out if something was missing or overlooked.
You'll sign that document once all is correct and any other deed documents that the attorney requires. And that's pretty much all you have to do on your end. Now you're just waiting to make sure the buyer completely funds the purchase and signs all of their documentation. You'll get a notification saying all is recorded and you can come and get your check, or you'll be notified that a wire will be coming your way shortly.
This could potentially be the largest amount of money you've ever received in your life, and it's worth celebrating.
Oh.
You've just significantly increased your net worth by owning a home. And now you have a taste of how awesome the investment you made years ago has grown. You may just be tossing that whole amount into the next home for a down payment, but it's still equity that you will continue to build over time. It's a wonderful feeling and a fantastic time to pop that bottle of champagne and enjoy the success.
Well, that's it for our last portion of our guide to home selling in North Carolina. Jess and I super hope that these videos have been a helpful learning journey for those of you that have never sold before and a refresher for others. If we can talk to you about selling your home in the future, we'd both love to sit down with you and give an absolutely free consultation to determine how to sell your home for the maximum profit. Our info is in the description below, so please reach out.
Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.